Welcome to this week's episode of Insight. We're going to devote the entirety of the show to the biggest news of the week, which is the attack on Iran that was launched by Israel last week. The attack on Iran began last Friday morning. The targets were military installations, senior military and civilian officials, and the civilian nuclear infrastructure that Iran has. These attacks were quite impressive because a good part of them were actually carried out from inside Iran by Mossad operatives using drones and other shorter fire rockets to hit anti-aircraft systems and other sites that were relevant in the Iranians being able to defend themselves. It's very clear that Israeli intelligence has totally penetrated Iranian military intelligence systems. But after this initial shock wore off, the Iranians have actually responded rather vigorously, targeting all kinds of military infrastructure facilities in Israel using long-range ballistic missiles. Now, what does all of this mean for Armenia? In short, nothing good. The best outcome of this war is for it to end as quickly as possible, but that's actually the least likely outcome. Regional disorder actually creates opportunities for aggression against Armenia. What has been preventing aggression against Armenia primarily has been Western pressure on the regime in Baku, but to a lesser degree, it's been red lines drawn by the Iranian leadership against the regime in Baku. Any kind of such a disorder in Iran is actually a complete negative for Armenia for many different reasons, because first of all, we only have two open borders, and this essentially means that we lose one of those. You're already seeing supply issues and transportation issues from goods that were coming into Armenia from Iran. And most worryingly is that we're likely to see, and we're already seeing this, is a significant wave of refugees fleeing Iran to come into Armenia. And this sort of became big news as of yesterday, as far as almost all the hotels between Mehri and Ghapan are full, and you're already seeing refugees in Yerevan already. And if this war continues, we might be dealing with numbers that this country simply does not have the capacity to handle. There's a distinct Azerbaijan angle to these attacks, because it's been confirmed by multiple sources that Azerbaijan is actually being used as a launching site for drones that are fired into northern and western Iran. Drones actually that are being fired into different military and civilian targets in Iran. The ones that are not being operated by Mossad from inside of the country come from two places. It's either northern Iraq, the Kurdish regions of northern Iraq, or they come from Azerbaijan. There are actually places that have been hit, which make it obvious that these are not things that are fired from Israel because of its proximity to Azerbaijan. In fact, according to WikiLeaks, as early as 2012, the Israelis have had a drone base operating out of Azerbaijan. One interesting development, which is quite telling, is the Azeri land borders have actually been closed since the time of COVID 2020. So none of their citizens can leave, or nobody can actually enter the country, but anything except going through the airport or flying in. And they've actually opened a corridor, supposedly for foreign diplomats to come and go. But I suspect what this has to do is to be able to smuggle out agents working for the Israelis out of the country as an exit form that they can escape if they're being hunted down by Iranian intelligence services, which they actually are actively as we speak. They have also, as we noted a couple of weeks ago, massive numbers of military flights that took place between Israel and Azerbaijan. And obviously what's become clear that those flights were actually taking drones there. And we thought at the time they were to be used against us, but it's obviously that they're taken there to be used against Iran. This is obviously a huge gamble, a risky move by Ilham Aliyev. But what this actually means is that he's actually quite confident of an Israeli victory and regime collapse in Iran, which is something that is definitely in the cards, but in no way a certainty. But what we do know is whatever chips, whatever credits that Ilham Aliyev earns by helping the Israelis attack Iran, those chips will be all cashed against us. Now, the irony of all this is Iran not being a factor, or the current government in Iran collapsing, is actually in a way a nightmare for the Azeri regime, because at that point their usefulness for Israel and for the West greatly diminishes. Now, what is all of this about? What we do know, it has actually nothing to do with the Iranian nuclear program. The primary purpose here is to destroy Iranian state capacity, and the secondary goal is a regime change in Iran. From a broader strategic point of view, Israel is obviously the most powerful country in the Middle East. But it only has one regional rival, though much weaker than her, that stands between Israel and full spectrum dominance in the Middle East, and that's Iran. The reality is that all the other centers of power in the Middle East, from Egypt to Turkey to the UAE or Saudi Arabia, when push comes to shove, will always bend the knee at Israeli demands. By the way, this war, for anyone who has any doubt, is entirely backed by the United States and the West. In fact, the United States is already actively involved in this war from a defensive perspective, which is they're the ones shooting down most of the rockets that are fired at Israel by the Iranians on a daily basis. It is very clear also that the negotiations that were going on between the Trump administration and Israel were essentially a fraud. It was essentially to lull the Iranian leadership to sleep, and we saw that it was used to great effect by the Israelis to essentially wipe out a good part of the military leadership in Iran. Given the defeat that Iran and her proxies suffered in Syria and Lebanon over the last year, there's actually a lot of logic in attacking Iran now, because frankly, it's at the weakest point it's been in decades. The goal here is to decapitate the Iranian civilian and military leadership and systematically destroy the military and economic capacities of the country. It is likely that this bombing program will eventually switch off to more localized attacks by local proxies using local Iranian dissidents or others in a campaign of terror, of destabilization from inside of the country. And we're already seeing this in car bombs that have been going off in Tehran and other places. Now, is this likely to lead to regime change? Not in the short run, because in the short run, what we have seen is essentially the country, even people who are opposed to the regime, rallying around the country while their country is being attacked, which is actually quite normal. But no one really knows if that holds, if this thing goes on for a long time and the scenarios get worse on a daily basis. Given that the goal here is the destruction of Iranian state capacity, we have to look forward to see what are the possible scenarios over the next few weeks. The first and the most likely one is a direct U.S. involvement in this war from an offensive capacity, because the U.S. is already involved in defending Israel. In short, Israel simply does not have the capacity to defeat Iran in a long military one-on-one struggle without direct help with the United States, especially when it comes to destroying Iran's nuclear facilities. This could move on to the assassination of the Iranian supreme leader, which is quite possible, to essentially cause leadership crisis in the country. Iran obviously will lose such a confrontation if the United States enters the fray and starts helping Israel attack Iran. But at the same time, Iran has many ways of retaliating. There are countless U.S. bases all around the region surrounding Iran, which are actually quite unprotected and vulnerable, and they can be attacked both by missiles and by local militias and Iranian proxies. Iran is very likely in such a scenario to actually get out of the nuclear non-proliferation treaty and essentially make a quick break to build some sort of a crude bomb in short order. However, by far the most effective way to actually respond to this, cheap way of responding to this, is actually to go after the economic targets all around them, especially of countries that are helping Israel and the United States attack Iran. They could target the oil facilities in Saudi Arabia, the UAE, or in Azerbaijan. They can also try to close the Straits of Hormuz, of which 20% of the world oil flows, which can actually be done by small boats or missiles fired from shore. They have specifically Chinese silkworm missiles for this purpose. And this essentially raises insurance costs and essentially makes it impossible to ship things through that area, both physically and economically. And if any of these things that I've outlined happen, you're probably looking at oil, which is in the $120 to $150 range, which will essentially cause a worldwide recession. And in a world that already has a troubled economy, and it's actually probably the fastest way to end this war. So the most likely Iranian response will be economic and not military. Wrapping up on this topic, let's not forget one thing. This war is actually brought to us by the same guard dogs of hell that have brought us Libya, Syria, and Iraq, with its hundreds of thousands of deaths and its millions of refugees. Wars like this are very easy to start. but no one can control how they end or precisely what monsters come out of them. From our national perspective, we want this to be as short as possible, but at the same time, in reality, we need to prepare for the worst case scenarios. The irony here is that the lesson for any Iranian leader, whether now or in the future, given that this attack was supposedly to prevent them from obtaining nuclear weapons, is that nuclear weapons are actually the only thing that can prevent future attacks on their country. And as a final point, let's understand anyone who's interested in political reform or democratization or freedom in Iran, which we all should be for. This war is not intended to achieve that. This war is intended to build a giant Syria exactly to the south of our country. As we conclude, very often war is actually talked about in quite clinical terms, and I think it's very important to get away from that and actually put human faces on it. I was reading some comments made by the German Chancellor Friedrich Merz a couple of days ago, in which he said to Israeli television that Israel is doing the dirty work for all of us. This is an exact quote from him. I think actually the Chancellor is being quite truthful. Let's look at what the German Chancellor means in practice. That was a video of Tara Hajmiri visiting her dentist's office. Tara and the rest of her family were killed in the first days of the war by Bibi Netanyahu's Air Force. By the way, her dad was a real estate agent and obviously not a military official or a nuclear scientist. The next time you hear any Western officials bloviating about international law, human rights, and my all-time favorite, European values, just remember Tara's little dance. Thank you for joining me in this week's episode of Insights.